Jesus has just concluded his Sermon on the Plain. Even though in Luke's gospel, Jesus' sermon is on a plain and not on a mount, like in Matthew's gospel, his sermon still has a peak. And it comes just verses before our text today in chapter 6, when Jesus teaches, "Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you." These words, "Love your enemies," are to be echoing in our ears as we come to today's text. Now, after such a lengthy teaching session on the Sermon on the Plain, Jesus is probably seeking some nice R&R. So he heads to Capernaum, the home base of his ministry along the Sea of Galilee, where he's always welcome in the home of Simon Peter's mother. But right when he enters the city, Jesus, a Jew, encounters two delegations of men on behalf of a centurion, a Roman military leader, who is concerned about his sick slave. At the time of Jesus, Jews were living under Roman occupation. Abiding by Roman rules, they were second-class citizens in their own homeland. This was not a new situation for the Jewish people, nor for Jesus. But just because it wasn't new doesn't mean that their subservient status didn't get old. I imagine from a centurion's perspective, this arrangement appeared quite normal and even equitable in his mind, especially to this centurion who appeared to care so deeply for the slaves under his authority, but also for the Jewish elders at large. But just because a person of privilege within a system of inequality is kind-hearted and merciful, that doesn't change the fact that those in power are still the oppressor, whether they want to be or not, and those subjugated to that power are still the oppressed, whether they want to be or not. We can think of modern examples from our own country and our own society, those who are oppressed and those who participate in systems of oppression, knowingly or unknowingly. We think of the Black Lives Matter movement and young African Americans who are speaking forth of their oppression and systems that are broken. We think of transgender persons who are seeking to use the restroom of their gender identity and are prevented from doing so, and we find ourselves involved in a system of oppression we may not have even ever thought of before. We think of our own veterans who are homeless and struggling with mental illness and the ways in which our society fails to care for them when they return home. All of these systems surround us, and we are part of them. The Roman centurion, as compassionate to his slaves as he was, and as kind as he was to the Jews under his authority, he was still a Roman centurion. To a Jew, he was still the enemy, the oppressor, the one who works for Herod Antipas and who uses force to dominate and who collects taxes to increase his power and military force. A historian at this time described the qualities of a centurion like this. A centurion is chosen for his great strength and tall stature, as a man who hurls spears and javelins skillfully and strongly, who has expert knowledge on how to fight with the sword and rotate the shield, and has learned the whole art of armature. You can see why the Jewish people might have been a little intimidated by these Roman centurions. Even though they shared a common land, they lived in two completely different worlds. They were adversaries of different class and status and religion and culture, trying to coexist for the sake of preserving whatever peace was possible. They were not neighbors, they were enemies, despite the friendly relations that we see in this text. So what happens here that's exceptional? What happens in this encounter between Jesus, the Jew, and the centurion, the Roman? Well, actually, the way Luke tells the story, Jesus and the centurion never meet face to face. First, Jesus is met by a delegation of Jewish elders who intercede on behalf of the centurion because they say he's a worthy man, that he had unusually good relationships with the local Jews. He generously paid for the building of their synagogue, and this establishes his credentials with the leaders. They also talk to Jesus about the centurion's beloved slave, whom he esteems so highly. And the slave is so very sick, and the centurion wants to help. The Jewish elders consider this centurion worthy, partly because of his generosity toward them, and partly because of his character toward those less than him. And so Jesus goes with him, journeying to the centurion's home, which, if you remember, would have been unclean by definition, since he was a Gentile. That's an example, again, that Jesus does not put holiness before compassion. However, before Jesus can even reach the house, another delegation of people come out to meet him, and they declare that they're there on behalf of the centurion because he does not consider himself worthy enough for Jesus to come into his house. So you have this dichotomy between the Jews' estimation of this centurion's worthiness and the centurion's own feelings of unworthiness before Jesus. And in that, you can really see his true humility. The centurion believes that Jesus has authority by virtue of who he is under God. All Jesus has to do is speak the word, and the slave will be healed. The man reports through his friends that he understands authority, not because of his superior position, but because he himself is one who operates under authority. He has the human power to speak to his soldiers based on what is commanded to him, and those things are done based on the commands he gives. And he considers Jesus to possess that same kind of authority under the God of Israel, whom he actually reveres. And so Jesus praises this Roman man's faith as being greater than that he has seen in Israel. By the time the centurion's friends return to the man's house, they find that the slave has been healed. Truth be told, though, the slave is physically healed, yes, but he is still a slave. He is still subject to another's authority. And therefore his salvation, his wholeness, will have to come in the kingdom of heaven, not on the kingdom here on earth. This continuing system of oppression is not okay. It was wrong in Jesus' day, and it's wrong today. The amazing thing is, God's grace works in spite of and despite our own failed and flawed systems. There's always light to be found. No matter how gridlocked you feel, God's grace prevails, even if God's justice will have to wait. This story reminds us that Jesus is not just a teacher. He comes with the power of God to give life to all people, to deliver us from all the forces that would keep us from experiencing the fullness of God's creation. It's the anticipated wholeness of the peaceable kingdom that Jesus comes to bring. And even though we don't see that full kingdom here, and we haven't experienced that full kingdom yet, it's these individual acts of healing that show us a glimpse of what is to come. They're very important, because even if the systems in which we live are still broken, one healed soul keeps hope alive, right? For what is to come, for what God desires for our world. And perhaps the key here is, of course, that the faith that Jesus sees is not from one of his own people, but from a Gentile. And while the faith of centurion may not be more than just the confidence that he really wants his slave to be healed, and he's heard about this man Jesus, his faith prepares us to see that faith is a gift from God that can be found anywhere and everywhere, in anyone and everyone, even in those whom we have considered outsiders, even in our own enemies. In this story, both the Jewish elders and Jesus see the centurion no longer just as an enemy, but one in whom the work of God is clearly seen. And so for me, this challenges me, and I've been asking myself all week, who are my enemies? And could it be that they reveal something about faith or God that I'm not seeing? Could it be that my enemies have gotten it right about some things? According to Merriam-Webster, the first definition of enemy is actually not an opponent in warfare or battle. It's simply a person who is actively opposed or hostile towards someone or something. Now, our media and our culture tell us that there are enemies lurking everywhere and that we must protect ourselves from them. And this rhetoric makes us even more fearful. Take the presidential election. Lord, help us all. I've refrained from speaking about this up until now, but with a passage like this, I cannot help but speak to the fact that we are a country that is factioning and therefore fracturing, based not on whether or not we believe in a presidential candidate and their policies or their platform. Rather, we are energizing ourselves around candidates because we so strongly oppose the other party's candidate that we will vote for anyone but them. It's a campaign built on negativity, not positivity, on hateful rhetoric, not heartfelt reasoning, on who we're against and not who we're for. I mean, this is what we're hearing, is that people are going to vote for Trump just because they hate Hillary or the Clintons or the Obama administration, or people are going to vote for Hillary just because they can't fathom Donald Trump as the president of the United States, let alone the leader of the free world. The election has devolved into more than just a mudslinging contest. It has been pure hateful at times. And while I truly believe that there is truth and wisdom to be found in all political parties and all candidates, hateful and derogatory rhetoric under the guise of campaigning is deplorable. It is not Christ-like, and in fact, I think it grieves God deeply. If we ever had an enemy, it is this kind of hateful language toward one another that lumps groups together because of their culture or religion, or that throws a negative adjective in front of a name as if to say that that negative adjective defines that person's humanity. And this hateful language is being used to unite people against other people, usually minority groups or people who are already oppressed. On this Memorial Day weekend, must we be reminded that men and women have lost their lives and their livelihoods fighting to preserve the freedoms of this United States of America. And yet it feels like we're more divided than ever. Politically, theologically, socioeconomically. Maybe we're not. I'm pretty young. Who knows? Maybe we're just more aware of it and it's been this bad before. But whether we're more divided now than we ever have been is kind of irrelevant. If we're divided at all by hate, we cannot be united in love. We are creating enemies within our own country, among ourselves, even as we obsess about our enemies overseas. Calvary, we have a wonderful story, though, within our own history about how our church united with diverse military personnel during World War II. This is from our history book by Wally Turner. It reads, "The attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, inaugurated a period of war that lasted almost 4 years. The first appeal of Pastor Henry G. Smith was that, quote, 'with our country at war, may we especially urge our membership to the discipline of prayer.' The imminence, though, of gasoline rationing and its effect on church programs led to the appointment of a committee, go figure, to study the problem. And yet that committee decided that the more immediate need was not to help the church programming, but was the ministry to the servicemen and women who were flocking to the military installations in the Denver area. A considerable number of them, from different backgrounds and traditions, cultures, and faiths, began to attend Calvary. On Easter Sunday, 1942, there were 45 new military personnel in worship, which led to boxes of cookies being sent at Christmas to them. Other military personnel were entertained in Calvary homes by members, and letters were sent by the church to the parents of those who had attended worship. By the end of the year, the annual report revealed the statistics. 820 military personnel had attended the Sunday morning services that year. 344 had accepted dinner invitations to church members' homes. 274 letters were sent to parents of active military personnel, and 108 Christmas boxes were delivered. And on Easter Sunday, 80 Calvary military personnel were sent a recording of a choir anthem, plus a message from the pastor. All in all, 6 Calvary members lost their lives in World War II. Alan Seth Thompson, Aubrey Knight, not our Aubrey Knight, but his father, George E. Shelf, Fred Small, Merle T. Johnson, and John T. Gildea. In addition, though, to giving tribute to those lives lost, Calvary also gave tribute to the members who faithfully served during that wartime, welcoming these servicemen and women into our church and staying in touch with them while they were away. Their names are Mrs. J.F. Shively, Mrs. Lee A. Moe, Mrs. Edith Wadley, Mrs. Carl Stone, and Mrs. R.F. Marshall. What a beautiful story of Calvary members coming together to welcome those serving our country who were in our neighborhood and city, a story of uniting around hospitality rather than correct theology or worship preference or faith tradition or background. The military personnel came from all over, and Calvary welcomed them without hesitation. It didn't matter where they were from. What mattered is that they were here now. Can we do the same today? Can we look past all those things that divide us? Can we look at those who have different opinions than us, or religious beliefs, or cultural practices, different political persuasions, and can we, first and foremost, acknowledge that they are human, each and every one of us, created in the image of God, Imagio Dei. If one person is created in the image of God, then all people are. No exceptions. If we can do that, if we can acknowledge that every single person is a human created in the image of God, regardless of our opinion of them, can we look for where wisdom is found in their words, where truth is found in their actions, where love is expressed in their relationships? There's an old Jewish proverb that says, "Listen to your enemy, for God is talking." We talk a lot about listening to God in our lives, and normally we think of listening to God through scripture or prayer or mentors and teachers or through that still small voice. But what about the voice of God that is speaking through those people that we cannot stand? Those people with whom we think we have nothing in common. What part of God's image do they have to reveal to us? Perhaps it's a part we've never seen before, and so it's hard for us to recognize. The centurion, who had never met Jesus and who was from a different culture and faith altogether, could recognize the authority and power when Jesus' own people and followers could not. Could it be that whoever we name as other or as the enemy might even be able to see something or say something about truth and about God and Christ that we can't see? So you have an assignment this week. I want you to listen to a voice that you'd rather tune out. It might be my voice right now. I want you to search for truth and wisdom in your oppressor, if you have one, whether that's a person or a system. Search for truth and wisdom in your estranged family member or in your opposing political candidate, in your neighbor of another faith, in your colleague who is another race, orientation, or gender identity. Read a paper that you normally wouldn't read. Switch to a news station that you don't normally watch. Call the family member who you can't sit across the dinner table from because, quote, there's nothing to agree about, and so therefore there's nothing to talk about, and talk to them. Invite yourself to experience a different image of God this week. Let yourself be surprised by God's grace and find it in an unexpected place or person. Be inspired by something that repulses you or annoys you or makes your blood boil. Take a deep breath in those moments and say, where is God here? Because God is there somewhere. Just as Jesus turned to the crowd that followed him and said, listen, everyone, this outsider, this Roman has more faith than I have found even among our own Jewish people. May we be humbled as we realize that our enemies sometimes get it right and sometimes we get it wrong. Thankfully, the pure grace of God is that because of people like this faith-filled centurion, healing can happen, even in the midst of our most prejudiced and evil human systems. And that's to be celebrated, that God's grace can still work. But the ultimate celebration and salvation will not come until the words of Amos are no longer prophecy, but reality. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. May it be so for us. May it be so for those who we don't consider part of us. And on this Memorial Day, may we remember the one who first gave his life for the freedom of our souls, for the freedom of our faith, Jesus Christ, the one who taught us to love our enemies and who showed us that, yes, sometimes they get it right. And so not only should we love them, we should learn from them too. Amen.